is Pretty in Black. I am Halo Eating Gray. So today I wanted to talk to you guys about grammar versus input. Okay, so when I started learning Korean a year ago, of course I was like, where do I start? I mean, I think that's everybody's question every time they get started into learning a new language. They want to know, where do I start? And with Korean, I think it is, I definitely think it's more significant that you will find most people will say that you will start with learning grammar early on. Your focus will very much be grammar, and you will find hundreds of videos to that fact. Now, most of the videos you find are from people who also are teaching Korean grammar. Does this mean that these people are just trying to make money? Are they just saying it just to get your dollar? I won't say that's the case. However, I did come across a video that was entitled, How to Acquire Any Language Not Learn It. And this was posted by Poly-glot-a-lot. So their video focuses on acquiring a language and acquiring a language through comprehensible input. It's like when you hear people talk about immersion. That's what I've gotten from this. And they say, don't learn grammar. Grammar is actually going to hurt you. Studies have shown that grammar will actually hurt you in learning a language. It will hinder you. You won't do as well. People who just immerse themselves in a language, learn through input and storytelling and whatnot, they do so much better. Are they right? Are they just trying to push another teaching method? Because, I mean, that could be the case as well. So it can be hard to determine which one is right. I would say for me, I fall somewhere in the middle as far as my opinion. I don't think you need as much grammar as will be pushed on you when you are learning Korean. However, when it comes to learning Korean specifically, I don't think you could just ignore grammar. Like the people in the video, they did learn Korean, like Korean is mentioned in there. So, I mean, I guess they're saying that this method worked for them. But I feel like there are some flaws with what they're saying. Number one, they talk about, acquisition, which is just absorbing a language subconsciously. And they talk about comprehensible input. So absorbing the language subconsciously is just like, basically if you were living in that country and everybody around you is speaking this language and not speaking your native language, over time you're going to start to pick up some words. That's what they're talking about. Comprehensible input is what they say is how babies learn. So basically, when you were a child, no one set you down and taught you grammar when you were first learning to speak. No, you just hear people around you speaking it, and you end up picking it up because you hear it so much. But I think right there is a huge flaw. When it comes to learning a second language, it's not like when you learned your first language. When you're an adult or when you're a teenager, whatever, when much later on in life, when you go to learn a language, you already have a word for those items around you. You already have a way of describing what you think or feel or whatever. So it's harder. You can't really learn it like a child at that point. You can't really learn it like a baby. Unless, maybe if you can go to the country and you can immerse yourself in that way, and you can put yourself in a position where basically you take the language you're learning, you go to another country or you go somewhere where everyone around you only speaks that language and they do not understand English or whatever your native language is at all, then yeah, but I have my language to learn to fall back on at all times. That's just what it is. And so you're going to fall back into your language and you're going to forget what you learned. So I think this idea that we can learn a new language like we learned when we were babies, I don't think that is going to work for a lot of people. I don't think it's going, some people might be able to pick it up like that, but I think that it's going to be something that's just not effective for most of us. Just my opinion. That being said, I don't think they were wrong 100%. There are definitely things in here that in the video, which I'll post the link to the video in the description in case you want to check it out. But there are different things in here that I agree with. Like one of the things they talk about is getting a language partner, which if you can do it, great. I think honestly for what they were describing, having a language partner would make it a little bit more difficult. But you basically want to have some sort of source where you can hear the language spoken correctly. And not just correctly, like similar to how a native would speak it. So a language partner would be your best go. But if you can't find like an actual person, I would say recordings could help. I would say even your translation app could help. And when they talk about sitting down with a native speaker and going through something like a magazine or a children's book and describing pictures. So like they're describing the pictures to you, you are asking questions about the pictures, but you're supposed to be doing this only in the language you're trying to learn. So I don't know how you're going to ask a question in that language. So I don't really get that, but that's what you're trying to ask, like, okay, what is this? What is that? What is this? So I'm guessing maybe they mean that the person that you sit down with understands English at least somewhat, because they do talk about like a language exchange. But yeah, if they don't grasp English at least somewhat, when you're like, what is this? What is that? Why did that happen? They're not even gonna know what you're asking them. So I don't know where that is. But the point about it that I liked was one of the things they talk about is not using your native language. So not using English in this case, which I think is important. The more time you spend speaking, listening, reading, whatever in your target language, the more practice you're going to get with it, the better you're going to get with it. So taking the time to just kind of cut out as much English as you possibly can when you're trying to learn another language, is your best bet. The other thing they talked about was no corrections. And I think that is so important. And that does kind of translate back to when we learned language as a kid. I remember I'm a mom. So when my daughter's coming up, she was saying, Mommy, I can put my pajamas on. And I was like, that's so cute. No one tell her. No one tell her. Just, yes, baby, you can put your pajamas on. And I didn't correct her. I didn't correct her and say, no, it's pajamas. No, it's pajamas. No, say pajamas. Like, I didn't do that because that's just going to make her feel like, oh my goodness, am I going to say the wrong thing? I don't know, which is the fear that we all have. I think it was better for me, instead of making a point to correct her in that moment, to say, yes, baby, you can put on your pajamas. Because the more times that she hears me say it correctly, over time, she's going to start saying it correctly. So I think the no corrections thing is a very big deal. Learning a language is just super stressful already. And I think the moment someone corrects you, it makes it hard to move forward talking to that person. No matter how innocent their correction may seem, you just kind of feel like, okay. And then sometimes you get defensive. I've found myself getting defensive. Like, but really, does it really matter? Does it really for real? Like, I know that I will make a sentence and I'll say Jonun in Korean, Jonun, and that has been corrected to Jon. And I'm looking like, that's the difference between I am and I'm. Leave me alone. No matter how innocent and how helpful they were trying to be to help me sound more natural, that correction made me feel defensive. It's like, so I'm not wrong, huh? So that's just how it is. So I think that it's important to, when you're learning that language, to not constantly be corrected, because then you're just so worried about trying to be perfect. What really needs to happen is someone needs to keep saying it to you correctly, and over time you'll pick it up. So this is why I talk about that's hard to do, I feel, with a native speaker, because who wants to devote their time to that? Like, they talk about finding a language parent. It's like, yeah, but I love that child that I had, and I mean, she spent her whole life with me, so yes, I'm sure she acquired her language for me. But you're talking about a grown-ass individual, like, repeat them, por favor. Like, no, thank you. I'm not going to keep repeating this. No, I'm a pass. So I think that it's better, honestly, to sit down with like a recording that you can replay, which Motivate Korean talks a lot about, like repetitive listening. So something similar to that. But rather than just listening, take like a sentence, or maybe just a word, short phrase, whatever. How long it is really just based on where your level's at, how long you've been doing it. But if you're starting out, I mean, I would even listen to 안녕하세요 over and over again. And then I would listen to how it's said when I hear it. Like when I hear it from like native speakers in like dramas or in interviews with K-pop stars or whatever, you know, I hear 안녕하세요, 안녕하세요. And rather than sitting there trying to, you know, and rather than someone coming up to me and say, no, you're saying it wrong, no, you're saying it wrong, you're saying it wrong, I just keep listening to someone say it correctly. And I try more and more to say it like how they're saying it. So I think the no corrections thing is good, but I think that it would be tedious and probably something that your language partner wouldn't want to sit down and do for a very long time. I don't know, maybe they're super committed, but I think it's better to probably sit down with something, with a recording, especially because the recording's never going to correct you. That's first off. They're never going to look at you weird because you're not getting it. Like, no, that's not what I said. They're never going to do that. And the recording's never going to, you know, and you can control the recording. You can, you know, you can play it back as many times as you want to. You can play the same thing over and over again. I will listen to the same thing and try to repeat it way beyond the amount of times that I need to repeat it. I mean, we're talking about bare minimum 20 times, but maybe well over 100 before. And it'll be like the simplest phrase. And I'm just going to keep repeating it. And I don't need someone saying, no, you're not putting the right inflection there, blah, blah, blah. So I think the no corrections thing was good. But when it comes to acquiring language overall, do I think you can solely go this way with Korean? No, I don't. I think that you do need to learn some grammar. That said, on the other end, I don't think you need to learn as much grammar as what will be pushed on you when learning Korean. Okay, so I got to the point where I was learning how to conjugate verbs in Korean. And it dawned on me that I don't need to know how to conjugate verbs. I know that might sound crazy to some of you, but unless you are trying to take a test, which the How to Acquire Language video does mention that learning grammar is good for if you're taking tests, basically. So unless you're trying to learn study for an exam where you are actually going to be asked, you know, you're going to be given verbs and it's going to be like, put this verb in present form in polite form. Like, you know what I'm saying? Present tense, polite form. Unless you are studying for something like that, you don't need to know how to create, you don't need to know how to conjugate verbs. There's a word in our dictionary that corresponds with whatever conjugation that you're learning, like when it comes to Korean specifically, okay? So like, there's go, and there's gone, and there's went, right? Like those are separate words. There is literally no process from changing go into went. Like, it is just another word in our dictionary. Because of that, you can literally just look up the word that corresponds with each of them. You see what I'm saying? And yes, to go, gata, is, went is going to be a conjugation of that. But you don't really need to know how to conjugate it. You just need to know what the word is and what it translates to in your language so you can say what you're trying to say. If you're not studying for a test, I just honestly can't see a point in learning how to conjugate verbs. Plus, there are apps that will literally, tell you every tense, every form. Now, that being said, why I say that learning past, present, future conjugation isn't really necessary when you're learning Korean, in my opinion, of course. It is important to learn about honorifics, because even if you're like putting it in a translation app, you're going to get it in particular honorific, and you need to know whether or not that's in like plain form and polite form and formal form. Like, it's sometimes like with translation apps, I have literally seen a sentence start with like "donun" and end in "hey," and if you're learning Korean, you know that that's not something that would happen, because ending in "hey" would imply informal, where "janun" implies more formal or polite. So yeah, so I've seen that, and so you need to be aware that that might happen. You need to be able to spot it when it happens. So I do think it's important to learn how to conjugate like the verbs into the formal, informal, and polite forms, or at least know what that's about. And that's pretty simple. But the past, present, future, no, it's just another word. It's just more vocabulary at the end of the day. However, I have found, I would say the opposite is true when it comes to learning Spanish. In Spanish, not only do you translate things into past, present, or future, you're also going to translate it into, like, based on who's doing it. I'm doing it, she's doing it, they're doing it, we're doing it. So, you know, you'll have to learn, you know, the different endings for that. So it just depends. But I would definitely say, in terms of Korean conjugated verbs, it is too far down the rabbit hole. And 9 times out of 10, it just ends up being a way that you delay actually speaking Korean. It will hinder you, because in the moment when you're in that conversation, to stop and think about, you know, am I saying the exact grammatically correct sentence? And think about what your, like, biggest fear of is. Like, most people learning a second language, what's the biggest fear when it comes to speaking? That we're going to mess up, that we're going to say it wrong. That's really, like, the biggest thing. We're going to say it wrong and we're going to sound stupid. Well, when you get overly stressed out about saying something right or wrong, and you have all this grammar floating around in your head, and then you can't even speak because now you're so confused about whether or not you can use this in this way and whatever. So I do think it's better to just, like, beef up your listening. I do think it's better to learn about vocabulary. I do think, however, you do need some sort of basic understanding, just like bare minimum basic with, like, Korean. Learning Hangul, okay, the Korean alphabet, learning Hangul. That's the first thing. Learning about sound change rules. That I don't think you need to memorize sound change rules, but I think you need to know they exist, so you're not surprised when something doesn't sound how it looks. Okay, so I think sound change rules are helpful. Learning some particles or whatever, those are helpful. And then learning literally, like, sentence order. And then from there, you need to start focusing on hearing it and being able to repeat it and things like that. The reason why I say that is because, I mean, after everything else, you can just pick and choose what you learn after that. Like, you can see, oh, there's a new particle I've never seen before. Okay, where can I put it in this sentence? And then learn where you can put it in a sentence, and then go on about it from there. Anything beyond that, I feel like you're getting to a point where you're just hindering yourself from actually speaking it. And so in the How to Acquire Any Language, they suggest not even learning how to read or write your target language until you learn how to speak it, which I thought was pretty interesting. I mean, I didn't see this early on before I started learning Korean, but I think that would have been a very different approach. But I could definitely understand that kind of thought, because I think it depends on what your motive is, or, like, what your overall goal is. Like I said, if you are studying for a test, I mean, I think it's going to be very important for you to learn the grammar. It just is what it is. I think that you're going to have to know how to read it and write it, you know, to a certain level if you hope to do well on the test. But yeah, if you're trying to learn to speak it, I could understand leaving out the reading and writing thing, leaving out the confusion of trying to sound stuff out and whatever. And I do think now, as I've went on anymore, when I see a new word, rather than sitting there trying to pronounce it on my own, I will just, you know, look for, if I can't get an actual native speaker to just say the word and pronounce it that way, I'll put it in my translation app and I'll just hit the read out loud and just repeat it that way, and just try to do it that way. Okay. And I think that makes more sense, and I don't understand why you wouldn't do that anyways. Like, why wouldn't you look to, like, see a word and then look to hear it pronounced correctly? Another thing about learning grammar when it comes to Korean, I feel like it'll help you actually be able to recognize when words are used. Because a lot of times you're not going to hear just the noun. Like, if you look up the word for car in Korean, it's cha. Okay, that's the word, but you're rarely going to hear just cha. I mean, at best you would hear, like, chayo. Like, if someone said, well, what do you like? You say chayo, I like cars, right? But you don't want to say I like cars, you just want to say cars. But you can't just say cars, because you need to be polite, so you got to put yo on it. So chayo. I've learned words and then, been listening to a song, know that that word is in there, but don't know where it's, like, don't know at what point they actually say it until I learn about, like, the subject and object markers and some of the other particles. So you take something like car, like cha, and it could be chae, chaga, charu, like, you see what I'm saying? Chanin, like, chayo. You can hear it all these different ways, and you're not often going to just hear it as cha. So you need to know that all of those ways still equal car. So how you know that is by learning at least basic grammar. And that is why I say at least learn some of the particles. That way you're not completely thrown off and you're like, did I learn car wrong? I'm so confused. Grammar is somewhat important. However, I do not think you need to go down the rabbit hole in grammar. I do not think you need to put as much focus in on it unless you are trying to study for a test at the end of the day. And there's nothing wrong with inevitably learning grammar, but I think if your goal is to speak it, then you need to spend more time speaking it. You need to spend more time listening to it. And if your goal is to watch dramas, because I've actually seen it said, watch dramas without subtitles, you need to spend a whole lot of time listening. A whole lot of time listening, focusing in, just listening. So I think that, yeah, I don't think that people are trying to game you or trying to get money out of you by pushing grammar on you. I don't think that it's wrong to learn grammar. You definitely learn grammar in your native language. You spent years upon years of learning grammar in your own language. But of course, by the time you went to kindergarten, you already knew how to speak it. So I think grammar is important. I think vocabulary is important. I don't think you should let these things hold you back from just getting out there and actually speaking it, actually listening to it, actually whatever you're trying to do. If you're trying to read books, then you should probably read a lot of books. Like, I mean, whatever your goals are, you should probably spend as much time in that kind of setting as you possibly can. Focus on that. One of the things I definitely need to say is that you are going to come across a ton of advice on how to learn another language. And in those videos, those people have learned those languages probably using those methods, or, learn some language using those methods. Okay. So has that been tested or proven or whatever? It has for them. Will it necessarily work for you? I mean, maybe yes, I guess, if you dedicate yourself to it, or maybe not. I mean, it just is what it is. You got to try some things out, find what is the best for you, and go forward with that particular way of being. So when you hear these theories, these hypotheses, whatever, these people have tried this and it has worked for them. That doesn't mean it's going to work for you. It may or may not. Honestly, I think it's kind of similar to when you read about like diets or something. Like, yeah, if you cut all those calories, you're going to lose weight. So like, yeah, I mean, I guess if you do all them steps, you'll probably learn something. But is it going to be as effective as you want? Is it going to be the next, the actual best thing for you to do? That is for you to decide. Don't let anyone deter you. I don't want to deter you from focusing on grammar if that's what you want to do. And either way, just have fun. As long as you keep up with it, I think that you will make it. So, yes. Like, share, subscribe. Share this with anyone who you think might like it. Stay healthy. And what's next?